I have to tell you something, and before I do, you need to know who I was. My name's Dr. Alan Peterson. For 30 years, my world was built on a foundation of solid facts. Data, political strategy, the cold, hard logic of power. I walked the marble halls of Washington, D.C. I served 2 presidents. I advised generals in rooms where the fate of nations was decided. My reality was what I could measure, what I could prove. God, for me, was a concept. A nice idea for other people, a tradition to be respected, but not a literal, tangible truth. I genuinely believed the future of humanity was in our hands. That with the right policies, the right technology, the right intellect, we could solve anything. I was so confident, so sure of my own understanding. I was dead wrong, dangerously, catastrophically wrong. And I had to die to find that out. It happened on a rainy Tuesday at exactly 2:37 in the afternoon. That was the moment the logic of my entire world shattered into a million pieces. I was in my office reviewing a briefing. The day was completely ordinary, mundane even. And then it came. A pain, a blast of pure agony, like lightning shooting straight through my chest. I couldn't breathe. I remember clutching my shirt, my knees buckling. I collapsed right there on the floor. The last thing I saw was my assistant's face, her eyes wide with terror. Her voice, the sounds of the office, it all started to sound like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. And then, nothing. The sounds faded out completely. The pain vanished. There was only a profound darkness, a cold, complete, silent void. I was gone. My heart had stopped. I was, for all clinical purposes, dead. But before I tell you what I saw in that darkness, you need to understand the man who died. You need to know what I was leaving behind. On the surface, my life was perfect. A beautiful home in Georgetown, the kind with ivy climbing the old brick, a wife, Sarah, who was graceful and kind. I had the respect of the most powerful people on the planet. I had everything a man could want, but it was all a shell. An elaborate, perfectly constructed, empty shell. My days began before the sun, not with prayer, but with classified briefings. The smell of old paper and bitter black coffee was my incense. Power was my religion, and the West Wing was my church. I'd sit in meetings where the slightest change in my tone could shift billions of dollars or move military assets. I was a master of that world. I knew every rule, every player, every hidden agenda. I knew things about world leaders that their own families didn't know, but I was a stranger in my own home. Sarah tried. God, she tried. She'd leave her Bible open on the nightstand, not aggressively, but just there, a silent invitation. On Sundays, she'd get ready for church, her face glowing with a quiet peace I couldn't comprehend. She'd ask me to come, just once. Her voice was always soft, never demanding. Alan, wouldn't it be nice to just rest for an hour? And I'd tap my pen on a stack of files and say something condescending like, "Honey, the world doesn't rest." I saw her faith as a weakness, a lovely but ultimately naive comfort blanket. What she didn't know was how much I secretly envied it. But the real ghost at the table was my son, Michael. He was an artist. He lived in Oregon trying to, in his words, create something real. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. It was just polite, sterile phone calls on holidays. I'd sent him money, paid for his education, given him everything I thought a father should. Everything except my time. Everything except myself. I saw his life, his rejection of my world, as a personal failure. My failure. And that quiet shame was a weight I carried every single day. Late at night, long after Sarah was asleep, I'd sometimes stand in my study, a glass of whiskey in my hand, and just stare out at the silent, sleeping city. I was the architect of a magnificent life, but I felt like a trespasser living in it. I had reached the absolute summit of my profession. I could influence the course of history, and I had never felt more empty. There was a quiet ache in my soul, a hollowness that no promotion, no presidential praise, no amount of success could ever fill. I thought that ache was just the price of admission, the cost of a serious life. What a fool I was. That emptiness wasn't the price. It was a vacuum, and something was about to rush in and fill it. What do you think is more terrifying, facing death or facing the life you've wasted? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear what happened when that darkness finally gave way to something else, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. I have so much more to tell you. Looking back, the signs were there. They were like little cracks in the foundation of my world, and I was too busy, too arrogant to look down and notice them. It started with something small, something I dismissed as a freak accident. I was in my study a few weeks before everything. It was just after dawn, the city still gray and quiet, and then a loud, violent thud against the window. A hawk had flown full speed directly into the thick glass pane right in front of my desk. It fell to the stone patio below, its neck broken. I just stared at it. A perfect, powerful creature, dead for no reason at all. My housekeeper, Maria, a deeply religious woman, saw it. She crossed herself and whispered, "Ease una malasinal, center, a bad omen." I just told her to clean it up. But the feeling from that morning, it lingered. A few nights later, I found Sarah sitting up in bed long after midnight. The only light was from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the room. She wasn't reading. She was just staring at the wall, her hands clenched in her lap. When I asked what was wrong, her voice was thin, like a wire stretched too tight. She said she had a feeling, a deep, gnawing dread that something was ending, that a great storm was coming and we weren't ready. I did what I always did. I played the part of the logical, reassuring husband. I told her she was just stressed, that everything was fine. But what I didn't tell her was that I felt it too. It was like a low hum in the back of my mind, a frequency of wrongness I couldn't tune out. Then it started happening at work. In the most secure rooms in the world, the data stopped making sense. We were getting intelligence from every corner of the globe, and it was all screaming the same thing: chaos. Not the usual predictable chaos of politics, but something else. A series of unprecedented ecological disasters, freak weather patterns that defied every model. A sudden, inexplicable spike in civil unrest in a dozen stable countries all at once. It was like the planet itself was developing a fever. My analysts were baffled. They called it a perfect storm of statistical anomalies. But it felt more like a symphony, and someone I couldn't see was conducting it. And here's something I've never told anyone. A week before my heart stopped, we received a highly classified report. It was a projection, compiled by our best minds, using data we weren't even supposed to have. The report concluded, with a 97% probability, that global systems, financial, environmental, and social, would suffer a catastrophic, simultaneous collapse within the next 18 months. It said the instability was accelerating exponentially. It didn't offer a reason, it just showed the results. And you know what I did? I buried it. I classified it so far down it would never see the light of day. It didn't fit our narrative. It was political suicide. I chose the comfortable lie over the terrifying truth. But the most direct warning didn't come from a computer model or a panicked aide. It came from my son, Michael. We hadn't spoken in months, and then one night around 2 a.m., my phone rang. His voice was frantic, breathless. He said he'd had a nightmare and woke up with an overwhelming feeling that he had to call me. Told me he dreamed he was standing on a hill, looking down at a city that looked like D.C. He said the sky turned the color of bruised fruit, and a silence fell over everything. A silence so complete it was louder than any noise. And then he said, a shadow rose from the east and just consumed the light. He was crying, actually crying on the phone, telling me he was scared and that he loved me. And I, in my infinite wisdom, told him he'd probably just had too much to drink and to get some sleep. I shut him down. I shut down the last real warning I would ever get. The morning it happened, that rainy Tuesday, I remember standing in front of the mirror fixing my tie. For a split second, the man staring back at me was a complete stranger. His eyes were hollow, filled with a deep, profound exhaustion that had nothing to do with a lack of sleep. Every choice I'd ever made, burying that report, dismissing my wife, hanging up on my son, it all seemed to flash before me in that one instant. I felt a sudden crushing weight in my chest. I thought it was just the pressure, the job. I straightened my tie, forced the feeling down, and walked out the door into the last few hours of my life. I ignored God, I ignored my family, I even ignored my own instincts. What do you think is the hardest warning sign for people to accept in their own lives? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to know what it felt like when that darkness finally broke, and what I saw on the other side, make sure you subscribe and click that bell. The story is just beginning. That rainy Tuesday afternoon, the world outside my window was a watercolor painting of gray and black. The rain was drumming a steady, lulling rhythm on the glass. 2:36 p.m. I was looking at a satellite intelligence report on agricultural futures. It sounds boring, I know. It was. My life had become a series of incredibly important but soul-crushingly boring documents. I remember the smell of the room-old leather from my chair, the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air purifier, the bitter aroma of coffee gone cold in my mug. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then at 2:37 p.m. it wasn't. It didn't start as a pain. It started as a pressure, a deep internal clenching, like a giant invisible fist had reached into my chest and was squeezing my heart into a pulp. I dropped my pen. It clattered on the polished oak of my desk, a tiny, insignificant sound in the face of what was happening. I tried to take a breath, but there was no room for air. The fist was tightening. My logical mind, the mind that had guided me through international crises, was still trying to work. It was calmly assessing the situation. Massive coronary event. Myocardial infarction. It was cataloging its own demise. But then the logic was consumed by a blast of pure, white-hot agony. It was an electrical fire erupting behind my sternum, shooting lightning down my left arm and up into my jaw. My vision, which had been focused on the report, suddenly swam. The black letters on the white page blurred into meaningless gray streaks. I pushed my chair back, a scraped, ugly sound on the hardwood floor. I had to stand. I had to do something, but my legs were gone. They were just useless anchors, and they buckled. I hit the floor hard. My cheeks slammed against the thick wool of the Persian rug. The impact jarred my teeth. For a second, all I could feel was the rough texture of the fibers against my skin. I could hear my assistant Jessica gasp from the outer office. I saw her shoes, then her face as she knelt down beside me. Her eyes were wide, two perfect circles of sheer terror. Her mouth was moving, but the sound was wrong. It was like I was at the bottom of a swimming pool and she was shouting at me from the surface. Her voice was a garbled, distant echo. My life wasn't flashing before my eyes. There were no grand memories, no cinematic montage of my accomplishments. There was only a cascade of crushing, pathetic regrets. I saw the look on my son Michael's face the last time I'd seen him, that quiet disappointment that had become his default expression around me. I saw my wife Sarah turning away from me in bed the night before, the silent chasm between us wider than any ocean. I hadn't just failed them. I had actively ignored them, trading their love for what? For a stack of reports on agricultural futures? Okay. The pain was starting to recede. The world was dimming, the edges of my vision turning black, closing in like a camera iris. Jessica's panicked face was the last thing I saw, a blurry moon in a shrinking sky. My very last conscious thought wasn't of power or politics or my legacy. It was a simple, desperate, silent scream to a God I didn't believe in. Please. And then, nothing. The pain vanished. The fear vanished. The regret vanished. My body, my office, my life, it was all gone. There was no tunnel of light. There were no angels singing. There was only a profound, absolute, and suffocating darkness. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of everything. No sound, no feeling, no up, no down. I was just a consciousness. A single, terrified point of awareness adrift in a cold, silent, infinite void. This was it. The great big nothing I had always believed in. Oblivion. And it was more horrifying than any hellfire I could have ever imagined. But that absolute nothingness wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the first chapter. What do you think is the most terrifying part of dying? The pain, the regret, or the possibility of absolute nothingness? I want to know what you think in the comments. And if you want to know what was waiting for me in that darkness, what shattered that perfect, terrifying void into a billion pieces, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't believe what happened next. I don't know how long I was in that void. Time doesn't exist there. It could have been a second or 1,000 years. The terror of it was pure. It wasn't the fear of being hurt. It was the fear of not being at all. I was just a thought, a memory of a man named Alan Peterson floating in an ocean of absolute zero. I had no eyes to see the darkness, no ears to hear the silence. I just was, and I was completely, utterly alone. I thought, this is it. This is the end. The great empty punchline to a life of ambition. But then, something changed. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a feeling, a vibration, deep and low. Like the hum of a power line, you feel more in your bones than you hear with your ears. It started to resonate within my consciousness. The perfect silent blackness began to shimmer, just slightly, as if disturbed by this new frequency. And with the vibration came a sensation of movement, a gentle, irresistible pull. I wasn't moving through the void. The void itself was moving me. I felt myself being drawn upward or backward. The directions were meaningless, but I was separating from something. It felt like pulling a thread from a piece of cloth. There was a faint resistance, a sense of adhesion, and then a clean, final snap. I was free, and as I drifted away, I could suddenly see what I had been attached to. Down below me, or behind me, the darkness gave way to a scene. A little diorama, perfectly lit, floating in the black. It was my office. I saw the Persian rug, the oak desk, the rain-streaked window, and I saw him, a man in an expensive suit, lying motionless on the floor. His face was pale, his eyes were glassy and vacant. It was my body. I was looking down at my own corpse. My assistant Jessica was on the phone, her voice a frantic, panicked sob that I could see but not hear. Paramedics were rushing in. It was all happening without me. I wasn't that man on the floor anymore. I was just watching. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The panic of the void was replaced by a profound, chilling detachment. I had no heart to race, no lungs to catch my breath. I was just an observer. I watched them work on my body, watched them use the defibrillator paddles. I saw the jolt, the lifeless way my chest jumped. It was like watching a movie about a stranger. The man on that floor, the man who had dismissed his wife's faith and ignored his son's call, he wasn't me. He was just a vessel I had left behind. The scene began to shrink, the light from my office dimming like a dying ember. The pulling sensation grew stronger, and the humming vibration grew into a chord. It was a sound that was also a color and a feeling. The absolute blackness around me began to soften, turning into a deep, velvety indigo shot through with faint, swirling nebulae of silver and gold. I wasn't afraid anymore. The detachment was giving way to a new feeling, an overwhelming sense of anticipation. I was no longer a man who had died. I was a soul who was arriving, and I knew, with a certainty that transcended all logic, that I was not traveling alone. If you could see your own life from the outside, detached from your body and your ego, what do you think would be the first thing you'd notice? Let me know your honest answer in the comments. And if you want to see who I met in that light and hear the message that I was sent back to deliver, you have to subscribe and ring that notification bell. What comes next changes everything. The humming grew, and the darkness around me began to dissolve. It didn't fade. It was more like a black ink being washed away by a current of pure, clean water. The cold emptiness was replaced by a warmth that felt more real than the sun on my skin. It was a warmth that seeped into the very core of my being, healing cracks I never even knew were there. And then I saw it. The light. To call it a light is to call the ocean a puddle. It was a self-aware, living ocean of pure, golden white brilliance. It was everywhere, and it was everything. And from it came a feeling, a wave of love so powerful, so absolute and unconditional, that it shattered every defense I'd ever built. The man I was, the arrogant, cynical, empty Dr. Alan Peterson, was unmade in an instant. All the shame, all the regret, all the years of quiet desperation were just washed away. I wasn't being judged, I was being welcomed. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally home. And in the heart of that living light, I saw him. It wasn't the man from the paintings with the beard and the gentle eyes. This was a being of pure energy, a form crafted from the very fabric of that light and love. He didn't speak a name, but I knew. Every part of my soul screamed his name in joyous recognition. Jesus. There were no words. There was no need for them. Our communication was instantaneous, a direct flow of thought and feeling that was more intimate than any conversation. He knew every thought I'd ever had, every secret I'd ever kept, and loved me anyway. He didn't show me a highlight reel of my life, he showed me the impact of it. I saw my life not from my own perspective, but from the perspective of those I had affected. I felt Sarah's loneliness as if it were my own, a quiet ache in a big empty house. I felt Michael's pain, the sting of my dismissive words, the crushing weight of my disapproval. I saw how my obsession with earthly power had created a wake of quiet suffering. It wasn't a punishment. It was just the truth, a truth delivered with infinite compassion. But then, he turned my attention away from myself. He showed me the world, our world, but he showed it to me through his eyes. From that perspective, Earth wasn't a beautiful blue marble. It was weeping. I saw dark, pulsing veins of fear and hatred spreading across the continents. I saw humanity disconnected, not just from God, but from each other, each person locked in their own little world of anger and distraction. This was the first great revelation. The signs the Bible spoke of weren't just metaphors. They were literal. I heard the planet itself groaning in pain, and he communicated a single, heartbreaking thought to me. They have eyes, but they do not see. Then the vision shifted. He showed me what was coming next, born out of this chaos. A shadow was gathering on the horizon. I saw a man step onto the world stage. He wasn't a monster. He was charismatic, brilliant, and he spoke with a voice that promised everything we were desperate for: peace, unity, an end to suffering. He would perform miracles, solve impossible problems, and the world would fall at his feet in adoration. He would be the ultimate answer to all our prayers, and he would be the ultimate lie, the deceiver, the Antichrist. The second revelation was terrifying. The greatest evil wouldn't come with fangs and claws, but with a smile and a helping hand. Finally, he looked at me. I say looked, but it was more like he focused the full, unfiltered intensity of his being directly into my soul. The love was still there, but now it was forged with a divine, earth-shattering urgency. This was the message I was sent back to deliver. This was the third and most important revelation. The thought he placed in my mind was as clear and sharp as a diamond. It wasn't a whisper. It was a trumpet blast that echoed through all of creation. He told me, "Tell them my return is no longer a distant promise. It is imminent. Time is not running out. Time is up. I am at the door." In that one, final, terrifying moment, I understood. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a parable. It was the final warning. If you were shown the unvarnished truth of your life's impact on others, what do you think would surprise you the most? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear what it felt like to be ripped from that perfect peace and thrown back into my broken body with this impossible mission, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The story of why I came back is just as important as what I saw. That final message, I am at the door, it wasn't just words. It was an event, it was the sound of a cosmic lock turning. In that instant, every part of my being was flooded with a peace that makes no earthly sense. The love, the light, the feeling of being home, it was all I had ever wanted. The thought of returning to that broken, heavy body on the floor, to the world of shadows and lies I had helped build, it was an agony worse than death itself. I didn't say it, I didn't have to, but my entire soul screamed a single plea. Don't make me go back. Please, let me stay. But there was no negotiation. The choice was never mine to make. The being of light didn't answer my plea with words. Instead, I felt a new sensation layered over the love. It was purpose. A divine, unshakable, and absolute mandate. It was as if he placed a small, white-hot coal of divine urgency directly into the center of my soul. It didn't burn me. It branded me. The mission was now a part of me, inseparable from my consciousness. I understood that the peace I felt wasn't a destination for me to enjoy. It was the fuel for the journey I had to take. Back. And then I was falling. Or more accurately, I was being pulled. Violently. The brilliant, loving light didn't fade gently. It was ripped away, shrinking into a golden star behind me as I was flung backward into the cold, silent blackness. The warmth vanished, replaced by a chilling rush of wind that wasn't real wind. It was the friction of a soul being dragged back across the veil, back toward the dense, messy dimension of flesh and bone. For a terrifying second, I was back in that empty void, but this time I was moving through it at an impossible speed. I was a meteor hurtling toward a planet I didn't want to hit. The impact was brutal. It was a full-body collision with reality. One moment I was a weightless point of awareness, and the next I was slammed back into the crushing gravity of my own body. A jolt, like 1,000 volts of electricity, convulsed through me. It wasn't pain. It was the return of pain itself, a sensation I had forgotten. The first breath I took was a ragged, desperate gasp that felt like swallowing fire. My lungs burned. My heart, that traitorous muscle, hammered against my ribs like a prisoner trying to break out of a cage. My eyes fluttered open. The first thing I saw was a blurry white ceiling. A light, so offensively bright and sterile, burned my vision. There were faces looking down at me, mouths moving, but the sounds were a garbled mess, like a radio stuck between stations. And then one sound cut through the chaos, sharp and rhythmic. Beep, beep, beep. It was the heart monitor. The machine that was measuring the life I had been sent back to, the life that no longer felt like my own. The doctor was shouting something. "We got him back! We got a pulse!" They sounded triumphant, but I felt nothing but a profound sense of loss. I looked down at my own hands lying on the gurney. They looked like props, like things that belonged to someone else. The man they had brought back wasn't Dr. Alan Peterson, the Washington insider. That man was gone forever, dissolved in a light he couldn't have comprehended. I was a messenger, an unwilling witness inhabiting the shell of a man I no longer knew. The message, his final warning, wasn't a memory. It was echoing in my bones, branded on my soul, louder than the beeping of any machine. Time is up. If you were forced to leave a place of perfect peace to deliver a warning that no one might believe, could you do it? What would be the first thing you'd do? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear about the days that followed, about trying to explain the unexplainable to doctors, to my wife, and to the world, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The fight had only just begun. Waking up in that hospital bed was the second most violent experience of my life, the first being my return to the body itself. The beeping of the heart monitor wasn't a sound of life to me. It was a metronome, ticking away the seconds of my imprisonment. The smell of the room was the first thing that truly hit me, a sterile, chemical scent of antiseptic and bleach that was an insult to a soul that had just been breathing the air of eternity. The sheets were coarse and stiff against my skin. Everything was wrong. Everything was a pale, gray imitation of the reality I had just been torn from. The doctors were the first to come, a team of them, looking down at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine astonishment. They called me a miracle. They used words like spontaneous cardiac restoration and unprecedented recovery. They showed me charts and brain scans, pointing to the lack of oxygen damage. They were celebrating a scientific anomaly, and I just stared at them, a stranger in my own skin. What they didn't know, what I couldn't possibly tell them, was that the man they had saved was gone. They were talking to his ghost. They saw a patient recovering from trauma. I saw a soul in exile. But then Sarah came, my wife. She pushed past the doctors, her face a mess of tear tracks and sleepless exhaustion, but her eyes were shining with a relief so profound it was almost holy. She grabbed my hand and her touch was warm, real. "Alan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh God, Alan, you're back. You're back." And in that moment, the first great tragedy of my new life struck me. I looked at this woman I had loved, this woman who had prayed for my return, and I felt nothing. A deep, profound, and horrifying distance. The love I had just experienced was an ocean, and hers, as pure as it was, now felt like a single drop of water. It was like trying to feel a candle's warmth from across a frozen lake. She must have seen it in my eyes. The emptiness. Her smile faltered. "What is it? Are you in pain?" I shook my head slowly. The words were trapped in my throat, a log jam of divine truth and human limitation. How could I explain? Where would I even begin? All I could manage to whisper was, "Sarah, it's all real." She just looked confused, her brow furrowed with concern. She squeezed my hand tighter and said, "Of course it's real, honey. You're safe now. You just need to rest." She thought I was delirious. And in that moment, I had never felt more alone. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. The world had lost its color. The food they brought me was tasteless. The flowers people sent had no scent. Conversations were just noise. Powerful men, my former colleagues, called to wish me well. Their talk of politics and policies sounded like the babbling of children. They were all arguing about how to rearrange the furniture in a house that was already on fire. And all the while, that message, that final terrifying warning, was not a memory. It was a burning coal in the center of my soul. "I am at the door." It echoed with every beat of the heart monitor. Beep, I am at the door. Beep, I am at the door. When they finally discharged me, they said I was healthy, that I could go home and resume my life. It was the cruelest joke I'd ever heard. I walked out of those hospital doors, leaning on Sarah, and the sunlight of the real world felt weak and thin. The city noise was a chaotic, pointless roar. I was a man who had seen the truth, and now I was being forced to live again in a world built on lies. But if I thought the hospital was a prison, coming face to face with the life I had built was something far worse. Have you ever had an experience so profound, so life-changing, that you knew you could never make anyone else truly understand it? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you want to know what happened when I tried to walk back into my old life, my career, my home, my family, with this impossible truth burning inside me, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The real battle was just about to begin. Walking back into my house in Georgetown was like stepping onto a movie set, a perfect replica of a life that was no longer mine. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, but I saw it all with new eyes. The awards on the mantle, heavy brass and crystal, looked like cheap trinkets. The photos of me with presidents and world leaders, they were pictures of a ghost. I could smell the lemon polish on the furniture and the faint, familiar scent of Sarah's perfume in the air. But it was all just sensory data, empty of any emotional connection. This place wasn't my home. It was a mausoleum I had built for myself, and I had just come back from the dead to visit it. That night, Sarah found me in my study. I hadn't turned on the lights. I was just sitting in the dark, staring at the shelves of books on political theory and military history. They were all lies, every single one of them. She came in and knelt by my chair, her face etched with a desperate, loving concern. "Alan, talk to me," she pleaded, her voice soft. "What did you see? The doctor said you were gone for over 7 minutes, and so I tried." I told her everything. About the void, the detachment, the living light. I told her about the feeling of absolute love, a love that made our 30 years together feel like a pale shadow. I told her what I saw for the world and the message he gave me. As I spoke, I watched her face change. The concern was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. Fear. Not for the world, but for me. Her eyes started to water. When I finished, she took my hand, her grip trembling. "Oh, Alan," she whispered, and her tone shattered what was left of my heart. It was the voice you use with someone who is broken, someone who needs to be handled with care. The trauma, what you went through, it can make the mind see things. She didn't believe me. She thought I was damaged. In that moment, surrounded by the artifacts of my successful life, with the woman I was supposed to love, I was an alien, a castaway on a foreign planet. The mission he had given me was already a crushing weight, and I was utterly alone, but what happened next was even worse. The phone started ringing. It was my old life, trying to pull me back into the machine. My chief of staff called, then a senator, then a 4-star general. They talked about the next crisis, the next strategy. It was like listening to ghosts. Their voices were just static, their concerns meaningless. One hung up on the general mid-sentence. I walked over to my desk, to the secure phone line that connected me to the most powerful men on earth, and I unplugged it from the wall. The silence that followed was the first real peace I'd felt since I'd come back. Then, I picked up my personal cell phone. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the contacts, past names that could topple governments, until I found the one that mattered. Michael. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary, cautious. Dad? And I just broke. For the first time since I woke up in that hospital, I cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, ragged sobs. I told him everything. Not about the light, not yet. I told him about the regret. I told him I was sorry. Not for the money or the schools, but for the emptiness. For choosing a file over his phone call. For seeing his art, his beautiful soul, as a problem to be solved instead of a gift to be cherished. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him take a shaky breath. Dad, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been waiting to hear that my whole life. In that one moment, I had built something more real than anything in my 30-year career. That call changed everything. The mission was no longer a burden, it was a path. The purpose he gave me wasn't about saving the world. It was about telling the truth, one person at a time, starting with myself. I walked away from it all. I sent in my resignation, a single sentence on a piece of paper. I started selling off the assets, the stocks, the properties. It was like shedding a heavy, useless skin. Sarah thought I was having a complete mental breakdown, and maybe from the world's perspective I was. But for the first time, I felt sane. I realized my new mission wouldn't be carried out in situation rooms or classified briefings. It would be carried out right here, in this room, talking to you. I traded a life of perceived power for a life of actual purpose. I had to die to learn how to live, and I had to lose the whole world to find my own soul. If you were given a second chance at life, a complete reset button, what is the very first thing you would change about your daily routine? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to understand the specific signs I was shown, things happening in our world right now that prove his warning is true, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We need to talk about what comes next. So I sit here now, not in a corner office overlooking the Potomac, but in a quiet room with a single camera. I traded a life of perceived power for a life of actual truth. And the truth is this: the life I lived before was a dream. A very convincing, very detailed, and ultimately meaningless dream. We all live in that dream to some extent. We build our lives on foundations of sand, our careers, our bank accounts, our reputations, believing they are solid rock. I'm here to tell you that the tide is coming in. What I learned in that light wasn't just about the end of the world. It was about the end of the illusion that we are in control, the illusion that this life is all there is. The greatest power I ever wielded in Washington is nothing compared to the power of a single soul turning toward the truth. The most important briefing I ever gave is nothing compared to the conversation I'm having with you right now. This message, this warning, it isn't mine. I'm just the mailman. And it was delivered to me with a love so profound it broke me and rebuilt me all at once. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to wake you up. Because he is waking people up all over the world, one heart at a time. Don't you feel it? That low hum of wrongness in the world? That sense that things are accelerating towards some unseen conclusion? That's not politics, that's not the news cycle. It's the signs. It's the birth pains of a new reality, and the final warning has been given. The time for debating theology in stained glass buildings is over. The time for casual, comfortable faith is over. This is a choice. A choice between the false light of a world promising a temporary, man-made peace and the true light that offers an eternal one. The door is closing. Not out of anger, but because the time has come. He is standing at that door knocking. My only question to you is this: will you answer? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. If this message resonates with you, if you feel that same urgency burning in your soul, then subscribe and hit that notification bell. I have so much more to share, the specific signs I was shown, the things happening right now that confirm his warning. We need to be ready.